Hello, everybody. Good evening. We can start after a couple of minutes of delay due to the technical problem. This is a session that is joined between the two workshops, WDSC and Codify, and with an invitation to begin. And is organized as follows. We have first an invited talk, and then the traditional roundtable. The topic this year is towards decentralized governance ? Usually they are rather interactive, so feel free to get into the discussion. I go directly to the invited talk. Massimo Morini, Chief Economist of Agron. He has had several roles in international organization, banking system, has been one of the first people interested in the technological decentralized developments in finance, and it is introducing the topic of governance in proposing. Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
This one as well. Let's use this one. So really, let's make it interactive. By the way, the topic is similar to the one of the panel. If you have questions, please interrupt me, because it's not very many slides, because essentially I'm essentially reasoning in today's presentation about what I've seen in the last 4 years as chief economist of public blockchain, and what we did to create this form of decentralized governance, what other blockchains did. I'm also starting the presentation from the same couple of slides of the presentation I gave yesterday evening. Apparently, the two topics are different, because the presentation yesterday evening was about, let's say, the transformation of money across history, and the link between banks, essentially, that digitized money first with their ledger money 500 years ago, and blockchains nowadays as the latest innovation in accounting with the help essentially of cryptography. That has been the big innovation. In a sense, however, the two topics are related, because even in any foreseeable future in which money is managed on one or more decentralized platform, rather than being moved essentially by banks, as it is still now, with some more contribution from central banks, the matter of decentralized governance is going to return. And it's not going to be something easy. In a sense, it's likely that I'm going to look at the problem from a specific point of view, somewhat. In fact, we even put the proof of stake term in the presentation. There are so many aspects in decentralized governance, but in my experience, I'm going to talk to you of the main issues we actually experienced. Yeah, in a sense, this page is simply I'm saying it's the history of ledgers, but maybe it's, in a sense, it's the history of history, because ledger starts essentially when the human being started writing. When we started this activity of writing that we usually use as the starting point of history, we did not want to actually write poems, and we were not actually solving any mathematical problems, despite of the fact that we needed to invent numbers as well when we started writing. The reason is that we started writing for accounting purposes, essentially to take into account the goods that were getting in and out of the temples that in Mesopotamia essentially represented also the center of the economic activity of the city. And we know that kind of accounting was essentially single letter accounting, single column, in a sense, if you want, of goods and quantities. Then a big innovation in accounting waits for a few thousand years before appearing, and it appears, this is also very interesting, it appears together with
another innovation whose relevant, there wouldn't be this conference, there wouldn't be any conference in mathematics without the first innovation that Luca Pacioli actually brought during the Renaissance, that was essentially Arab numbers or Indian numbers, since that is the actual source. But this is also funny, you know, that the numbers that allow to do mathematics in an acceptable way, because doing mathematics with Roman numbers was completely crazy. Again, it's introduced with the justification that we have to do better accounting. That better accounting was double ledger accounting, in which you have essentially not only one entry when there is an economic event, but two entries. We can say a giver and a receiver for every economic event. No? And yes, we see some effects. Banks that in the past used to be pure custodians of gold and coins transform themselves into creators of digital money. I mean, if we look at the etymology of the expression digital, it means that it's represented by digits. They are not zeros and one, or they are, because they are another numerical system, we know that this is not particularly relevant. In a sense, banks make the first digitization of money with their ledger-based system, and essentially they manage to make an incredible revolution in the economy. Because now, if, for example, I don't know, a merchant in Florence needs to send some money to, or probably the opposite is more likely. Let's say if the King of France needs to send some money to a merchant which is in another European city, maybe through, I don't know, Medici Bank in Florence, essentially rather than having to set up some convoy and cart full of gold and send it to Europe, you only have to send a message telling the Paris branch, telling the central branch in Florence, maybe, I don't know, the other branch in Milan, if that's where the merchant accounts were kept, that there is an update to make to the ledgers. And that's it. And money essentially, boom. And then the king will withdraw that in Paris, even if actually that's not exactly the same money that the merchant put in Milan or the other way around. Then the other big innovation has been also one of the motivations of, or one of the main topics of this conference, and we have to wait for a few centuries, and then we have what someone calls triple entry accounting, which is, if you want, double entry accounting, still a giver and a receiver in the ledger, but with the digital signatures of the giver and the receiver. We have seen it implemented in Bitcoin, so with the additional idea that this ledger is actually decentralized on the internet, on a peer-to-peer system, and in that situation, the signature of the receiver is no more relevant because everyone can check that actually money has gone to a certain person, and this person, pseudonymous person, has access to it. You know what is important actually in order to validate the transaction is that the giver signs the message that moves the resources. After that, you can say that we are now eventually seeing a lot of innovation in accounting. Once accounting has become a technology, we have seen smart contracts. Smart contract, in a sense, is giving is management of the rights to write on the ledger. I mean, obviously, as programmers, we may see more in that. If we want to reduce smart contracts to what they are essentially management of the rights to actually change the ledger. And we've seen an increase in scalability, and we have also seen changes in the consensus algorithm that allows us essentially to validate the changes in the ledger. For example, with the emergence of proof of stake. There is obviously a symmetric way to look at blockchain. So far, we have looked at blockchain as an innovation in finance and in accounting. We can see that as a pure innovation in technology if we consider that essentially blockchain technology is also an attempt to actually make the internet a good network of value. Because I mean, I don't have to explain that the internet has been an incredible network for the exchange of information, and I don't even think I should explain that it's obvious that it's not a good network for value. We may mention many things, from the most technical, which is the fact that in the internet there is not an objective, decentralized order of packets or messages, and that is probably not a big problem if you need to send a picture and you have the transport layer where the sender actually order the different packets and the receiver has no purpose, in changing the order. Neither the sender has got any frauds to make with the order of packets. But if messages start becoming transactions, you may have an incentive to try to do double spending or to create other problems to the network. Second thing we could mention, which is so obvious that we often don't see it, is that in the internet, really, we have no identity, completely no identity. Every time we need to use a new service in the internet, we actually have to reinvent a nickname for us. We have to reinvent the password, communicate the password to someone providing the service that remembers it and say, oh, if you are going to use the same password you used the other time, I'm going to let you in again. And that's it. We cannot have any property in the internet. Oh, in a sense, yes. If the thing is serious, we can take our plastic ID, make a picture and a smile. If you ever tried to I don't know, enroll into a centralized exchange for cryptos, you have seen this procedure. And then our property, in a sense, is guaranteed outside the web, still in this reality that at times we call the real world, even we often spend more time on the web rather than doing things in the physical world. But blockchain has got something similar to identity, because even have many real identities. Why I call them real identities? Because once you have a public key or the actual public key identifying you and a private key that allows you to actually act as the public key that the others recognize, you have some stability of your identity and some self-sovereignty of your identity. And then finally, probably a very important economic change, blockchain doesn't set the system on a client-server basis, but tries to make it as a peer-to-peer decentralized system. Because otherwise, what ownership there can be when all the information in the servers of few companies. And then we also know that in the internet, there is a tendency to centralization of business that has no comparisons. After 500 years of banking, an obvious pushes towards centralization. Think of what is happening in the United States now, with JP Morgan, largest bank in the US, becoming owner of many smaller banks. In spite of this, we still have thousands, tens of thousands of banks in the world. But how many search engines we have in the internet? How many social networks for kids? How many social networks for boomers? How many social networks for the cool age in the middle that I don't even remember anymore? One. Oh, we have TikTok, we have Instagram, we have Facebook. Yeah. If there is an identity issue at the level of age, you may have more services. Otherwise, the world has one. That was the idea of Libra, that having one single control of the world. And obviously, they had to use blockchain technology in order to say that, yes, no, I'm going to, even if it is a centralized project, it's going to be decentralized in validation and so on. But probably it makes sense to think of decentralization as one fundamental point of such a network of value. And yet, we have the issue. How do we govern a decentralized system? In a very little context, I had to face this issue during my activity in public blockchains. And I'm going to go through a potential reasoning of the issues and of the goals that you have that obviously, things in reality happen in a much more messy way than the way you try then to represent them in a presentation or in a paper. But obviously, apart from this exercise, I'm trying, to rationalize a little bit what happens when you try to set up a decentralized form of governance. Of course, the main goal, the fundamental goal is giving decision-making to the community, decentralize decision making. At the same time, this may appear a trivial thing, but it's not from a formal point of view. You also want as much participation as possible, because I mean, you are certainly decentralizing governance. If you say, guys, those who want in the community can actually participate in governance. But if for some reason no one answers the call, in the end, it's still you. If one person and two people answer the call, you have not really obtained that serious decentralization, So that seems to be included in the first goal, and probably it is in principle, but in practice, the two problems may appear different, because I've experienced this. Okay, you start decentralizing some power, and no one is coming, because there are maybe some hidden costs, maybe there are some barriers to entry, and so on. Okay, I've decentralized, but in reality, you have decentralized nothing. And then there are two enormous issues again. The first issue, but then we will have to talk about that again. The first issue is the quality of decisions. Obviously, when you decentralize decisions, there is a risk that you reduce the quality of decisions. I've seen many people in blockchain community, when you propose to decentralize decisions, say, well, you have been working so well. It depends on the moment in which you ask. It happened to me that in that moment, the community was happy of the way the network was managed. They say, why do you want to decentralize it? I remember messages that I said at the time saying, we are idiots, you have been planning the evolution of this, why you want us to make decisions? It's a real problem, obviously. And then there is another one, which is implementation of decisions. Maybe, since probably everyone in this conference is a programmer, when we think of governance of blockchain, we have, I don't know, teasers in mind. And that's mostly changes to the protocol. This is part of governance. There are several aspects. When you only have to change some code, probably you can decentralize almost the whole process. But once you move to more economic decisions, strategic decisions, or organizational decisions, it's not necessarily so easy to decentralize the implementation. The choice is easier in the sense, the decision. The implementation is less easy. Oh, for a logical reasons, I realized that we have to go through these topics in a sort of reverse order, starting from the issues of implementation to actually the goal of having as much inclusion as possible. Well, decentralized implementation is different, as I was saying, depending on which kind of implementation you need to decentralize. If you want to decentralize the implementation of code, the problem in a sense doesn't exist, because your proposal for a change or for an evolution is expressed in code already. If this is approved, you replace that part of code. That's why, often governance starts from a GitHub repository for many blockchains. We have realized that for other kinds of decision, for example, GitHub is probably not the right tool. But okay, with code, that's fine. Then there is another aspect which is of crucial importance, for example, in a blockchain network as they are today, which is funding decision. I don't know if you know Catalyst from Cardano. That's the idea that you have a decentralized treasury with a decentralized decision about distributing money. In that case, the decision is relatively easy. Or I don't know if you remember also the DAO case, back in 2016, before the war, the DAO had an interesting evolution because no one knew that word, you know, in 2015 or 2016, even if it was already used in our community. But then in 2016, after the hack, if you want to call it a hack, it became an infamous, famous word. Then, after a few years, it has gone back to be the darling of many, I don't know, many newspapers for business people, from Forbes to big companies. But if you think of the case of the DAO, you probably realize that the moment in which the system was sort of broken, you know, by the hack, was the easy one. People voting which projects were supposed to receive the available funding. But I've always wondered, and then how that would have actually been controlled. How could you have set milestones for these projects to actually receive the different installments of your funding? How could you actually check that they were not just taking the money and running away, you know, in a sense? And yeah, that's always an issue. Yet, in any case, you are able at least to transfer the money, decide when it is transferred. That's not so difficult to decentralize. Then if you have to make things that are more strategical or organizational thing, I don't know, such as, you know, setting up new companies, changing some aspects that may have some legal implementation, I don't know, hiring some people or things like that, then it's hard that the decision really gets decentralized. That's why, so far, when we think of decentralized governance, the best examples we have are still something hybrid. There's still a core team actually taking many decisions and implementing most of the decision. There are some committees that may be a form of you know, delegation in a sense of decision making, but not really the one that you expect so much in blockchain. Then there can be more decentralized ways of selecting specific people or specific entities to govern. For example, you may have liquid governance in which you can delegate your voting power to an entity, or you may have even more decentralized mechanism. For example, those that have participated to the governance for more than 1 year become more powerful governors. Those that are happy to ensure a commitment that is going to be for the next year, which is even more interesting probably, will have more power than the others, and or maybe also more, a different kind of decision power. And then obviously below that you have the general voters. What can you do for the quality of decisions in this situation? In a sense, in the blockchain, you cannot really assess the capacity to decide of someone that needs to become a governor. You may say yes, because it's decentralized, because it's pseudonymous. But think of that. In a sense, no democracy really makes a selection of the participants to governance based on the quality of decision. At a certain level, of course, you may have representative democracy and you elect a minority of representatives that take decisions and so on. But the right to be part of governance usually doesn't involve any kind of assessment of quality. I would say that quality of decision is often replaced by a proxy, which is skin in the game. So how much you are affected by decision or involved in decision. In fact, usually countries have their citizens to vote, and often just the residents. While the fact that if you are a citizen and you are not a resident, yes, in some cases you can vote, but it's usually considered less relevant. Or, you know, in companies, essentially, if you are an owner and maybe you have shares and the value of the shares is going to depend on decision making, then you vote. There's not really at the base layer any selection of quality. And blockchains do something similar, essentially, no? So they use skin in the game as a proxy, and in a sense, usually a blockchain inherits what they do for consensus, for their fundamental consensus problem. So if you are a proof of work blockchain, you obviously tend to give to mining an important role in governance. If you are a proof of stake blockchain, you usually use stake as a way to measure your governance rights. And even more obviously, in a sense, if you are a proof of authority blockchain, those vested interests that allow you to become one of the validators will also have a role in allowing you to govern at a higher level the network. In a sense, that's exactly what I have repeated in this slide. In a sense, it's similar, but in the way you apply it, it cannot be applied in the same way. What are the foundations of proof of work, proof of stake, and obviously also proof of authority? The foundation, I would say, is that if you have skin in the game, so either if you bought an enormous mining farm spending hundreds of millions of hardware that probably becomes very hard to reuse for something else because it's full of assets that can only do Bitcoin mining. So if you are in this situation, or if you have billions of cryptocurrencies, or if you are one of the founders of a blockchain consortium, so we have moved from proof of work to proof of stake, to proof of authority, in a sense, the fact that you have this skin in the game comes with the assumption that you are going to be honest when you are going to validate transactions. And you may also have in place further elements of game theory that try to increase the probability that this happens. You may have some mathematical protocol that is Byzantine fault tolerant. Okay, that's fine. But the core of the decision is essentially your skin in the game measured in different ways. But when it comes to governance, you realize that the things cannot be really the same. Because the effects of fork on a ledger, on a system, are almost immediate. It can create outrage among the users. It can destroy the reputation of a network in a few days or even hours. So if you are there with your mining tools, even if you're there with your stake, because then liquidating a large stake is never easy, you know, without affecting the market, while there has been a fork in the market and so on. So skin in the game works, even if your commitment is, in a sense, if your commitment is relatively short. But when it comes to governance, the actual effect of bad decisions is a little bit longer term. When I say little bit, because in a sense, we don't want to punish or to disincentivize the participation of people that take wrong decision, because with insight, we realize that they are wrong decisions. We are obviously trying to disincentivize the participation of someone that takes decisions that are pretty obviously wrong, and they have the purpose of damaging the network. In which case, in any case, you need some medium term, because you need some time before the fact that the decision has been taken gets known, gets assessed, some of the first consequences are seen. Therefore, usually the incentives for governors are a little bit longer term than the incentives for consensus. Maybe don't receive your rewards immediately after, or maybe just a few hours or epochs or whatever you have in the different blockchain after you validated a transaction, maybe 1 or 3 months later. 3 months is, for example, one amount of time that I've been mostly seeing used when I was involved. But there is something more. When for the first time we started doing a governance system, we were a relatively young blockchain, there were not so many things to do in the blockchain. But it took only a few months to realize that now there were several relevant activities that were requiring users to actually occupy, let's say, their stake, which means that not necessarily their stake was spent, it remained measurable, but it was not available to prove that you were a governor because it could have been used, for example, for DeFi. That was the most obvious new thing that changed the picture. Yes, it changes the picture because you may have the risk that these free activities, let's start with the first line, being in consensus, so running consensus nodes, being a governor, showing that you have a stake for taking a decision, or being in DeFi for lending or providing liquidity indexes and so on, they risk crowding each other out. There is always an opportunity cost because someone can say, oh, come on, if I stay in governance, there is a very small reward, for example, much better to do consensus that has got better reward. Then obviously, if you do consensus, however, maybe some protocols like Algorand is a very little energy or hardware cost, still it requires attention, continuity, and so on. Maybe in other blockchains, it even requires, better hardware and much more energy. You may see the opportunity cost in a different way. Same reasoning for DeFi. Oh yes, DeFi may return higher returns on average or on expectation, but it involves a much higher risk, which is not necessarily only financial risk, but it's also the risk, for example, of choosing a project that will get hacked or a project that is not reliable, and then you will lose everything because of a hack. Yet, you need to make this consideration. You need to have the relative compensation to be such that none of these activities is killed by another one. Also, that's one of the economic problems when you have to deal with a reality like modern blockchain. Additionally, if you are, for example, in proof of stake, it's obvious that some activities, like those that I have underlined with this sort of oval, lend themselves much better to be measured in an objective, decentralized way. Because everyone would like to have, the best programmers decide, a little bit like it happens in Bitcoin. But that happened naturally. It happened centuries ago, if we have to consider the speed of things in the blockchain space. And it's not so easy to reconstruct in a new reality that wants to move faster, and very soon wants to have a decentralized system. While there are other things that are much more objectively measurable in terms of stake. Yes, then there is also a paper that I'm using, the one where we put out the idea for the first time. There is also a solution that, in a sense, seems to be obvious, but it's not really so obvious when you have to start doing it. Also because obviously it involves some technical issues and transformation. Why not putting these activities together? Or better still, why not having in governance exactly the people that do that run nodes, potentially even the people that participate to the relaying of messages, if that's relevant in a blockchain. But even more important, which was the first implementation we did more than 1 year ago now, around 1 year ago, was actually having in governance those that participate in DeFi, in an economic activity that, to say the truth, you may like it or not, was the only fast-growing industry in the blockchain space. That was obvious, and that's for sure. Obviously, this generates some issues because, in a sense, if you want someone to show a stable economic commitment, that's easy when they are just holding the platform token for a while. You say, what's your stake over this period? Okay, you are holding 100 ethers now, considering that also Ethereum is proof of stake. You're holding 100 ethers, okay, that's fine, that's your commitment. But if you are in DeFi, there can be actually changes in value, which can be quite dramatic. However, there are technical ways to essentially recognize that you can have an objective measurement that measures the skin in the game of someone with a precision which is essentially analogous to the one which is someone doing the staking, which means holding their tokens for a while. And well, one example in borrowing lending is when you are a lender. Then in principle, you could even accept that if the lender is really committing part of his resources to favor, the economic system, if the lender for some reason actually receives a very, very rapid margin calls that you have in DeFi compared to the margin calls of traditional finance, you may even accept that if he actually at the beginning of the period had his resources in lending, and then there was a big systemic event, prices change, and he has lost it, but he's still government. He has proven his commitment as much as the others. Maybe he's losing money, but his position is still there. Okay, could be okay. Even more interesting from a technological point of view, that was more difficult and a little bit more confusing. In fact, for example, we have never implemented it. You lend and you remain with your lending, but if your lending reduces for some reason, in a sense that could be an issue. But in DEXs, there is something interesting because you know that automated market makers, particularly, I mean, traditional ones, constant orders or things like that, they return you LP or liquidity provision tokens when you commit in a DEX. And these LP tokens are a fixed amount in spite of the existence of impermanent loss that may apparently change completely the value of your commitment measured in the network token. But your actual commitment is always the same of someone that is staking with just the network token. And one might decide that you only want those that are providing liquidity, in any case, in pools that include the network token. If you are in Ethereum, for example, participate to the governance, and or in any case, they may participate with a stake which is half their amount of LP tokens. These are decisions that, however, do not change the fact that you have a way to actually measure that these guys are putting a continuous commitment into the economy of the blockchain. We were a little bit inspired in the design of the decentralized governance by something that some of you may have already heard of. I think that Eleanor Ostrom was actually the first woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Economy, and she is mostly known for having worked on that topic that often is called the tragedy of commons. The tragedy of commons is really the problem of decentralized governance. The fact that when things are not owned privately by someone with a strong vested interest, everyone may act lazily about the common goods, everyone may act egoistically, and that's a little bit the problems that we have in decentralized governance. I have been strongly accused by my co-authors of having bent the principle to the logic of blockchain. But for me, that was exactly what we had to do, I mean, obviously, if the principle has been written for, the management of common waters and rivers for agriculture, some principle may appear different from the situation we have. What I tried to do was thinking at a more abstract level and finding the kind of advice that applied also to our reality. And that's my formulation of the eight principles. Rights should always be measured by commitment. So in a sense, how much you really participate, you know, to the management of the governance of the commons, in a sense, that measures, in a sense, your power. Avoid one-size-fits-all approach. There can be different roles, you know, in the management of common goods. Recognize that and be consistent with that. Be inclusive as possible. Monitor compliance, sanction the breach of rules, find ways to resolve conflicts, let governors decide their organization, and create a system of nested tiers with different roles that, in a sense, mirrors point two. And that was the logic that, in a sense, inspired us in this designing a governance with different roles, different ways of being committed, and so on. There is an interesting point, you know, that is related to the Austrian principle that asks you to let the governors decide on the governance. There is an element that shows a little bit of conflict of interest, because at times the governors, for example, have to decide how much they are paid for their activity. Or if someone decides to commit more because he has got more time, because the community trusts him, yes, but how do you remunerate its activity? It's a little bit of a problem, you know, because at times, you know, there is a big vote, there is maybe a base remuneration that goes to everyone. It's very hard to expect the governors to give to themselves very low amounts. It's possible, you know, but in that moment, you are potentially trusting decisions of the community a little bit too much. This is, I agree, a question mark. Oh, for example, there are countries like Switzerland. I mean, let me make a little example briefly. That 1 or 2 months ago, the Swiss have been asked in a poll that could become a referendum in some time if they thought that Switzerland should have a big bank like UBS now, really one of the largest banks in the world, or if that bank had to be broken into smaller, weaker banks. Guys, I don't know what would be the result of the votes in Croatia. In my country, in Italy, the large majority of the people say, great, one bank, one champions, bigger than the others. Totally stupid decision in terms of risk management. The Swiss, by large majority, concluded that the big bank had to be broken, and they had to have smaller players and not a world leader. Much safer, obviously, you know, for the countries. But in a sense, you don't know if you are dealing with the Swiss or the Italians. Let me use my country as an example, since every Italian usually does it when we have to find an example of a country that is not able to govern themselves. That's part of our history. But how do you deal with the risk that the decision is selfish? You know, you make people decide on the level of taxes and they say 0 taxes. Then the system collapses. You know? What we try to do is always having choices that involve a trade-off. Do you want to have more rewards? You will need to make more commitment. If your commitments goes down to 0, also your rewards go down to 0. You know, obviously there are many issues even in designing this framework, but at least you have a framework. And we also realized that there were different ways to make. You may say, when I use the word commitment, what the hell I mean? Commitment may be commitment in time, you know, compared to the concept of staking. You can make the required staking to receive a reward and to actually have a role, longer or shorter. You may require different level of locking, because, you know, when we say locking, we think that we know what we mean, and we should in principle. Locking means that you put things in a smart contract and you only see them after, 1 or 3 months. But there could be softer forms of locking. slashing is a form of loss. You can withdraw, but you lose an amount. Even just the idea that you will only receive rewards proportionally to the amount you have at the very end of the period is a way to incentivize the staying more. So it's a form of loss. And then you may have instead activities. Okay, do you want to also participate in the economy in DeFi? Do you want to also participate in the economy doing consensus? That allows you maybe to have more right and potentially more rewards. If I don't remember wrongly, yeah, and this may be also in a nested way. So the groups can be separate, or actually you may have a sort of pyramid in a sense, because then it becomes a pyramid in commitment and in incentives that you receive. That's it. Thank you. There are any questions?
Okay.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Alan. I'm working on an enterprise blockchain and self-sovereign identity space. But I have a very simple question. When it comes to decentralization and decentralized governance, I think there are several layers, and even though technology is decentralized, there's always the interesting question how to ensure that votes, that power is distributed equally, so that like even if in blockchain we see like a lot of, so if you have money, you can always outpower others. So is there any work done with regards to the topic on like how to achieve that strength of the vote is as, let's say, equal as possible, so that
Can I sit down, because this is a big issue. Yes, please.
While you sit down, can I ask the panelists to join?
Should I leave the seat to the panelists?
No, you are on the panelists, but while you are, so we.
But the observation is the following one. First of all, as I was saying in the slides, you, in a sense, inherit a principle from your consensus approach, from your protocol. Because if you have consistently in the consensus protocol that those who run the biggest mining farm is the one that has got more right to validate, or the one that holds more tokens, it's very bizarre that you think that now when it comes to governance, everything changes. Yet at times you want to do that in any case, to have checks and balances, in a sense. And what can you do? For example, you can give, I don't know, votes by, I don't know, wallet. You want a wallet? It's not only that you can game the wallets, because you can create hundreds of wallets even if you are a single individual. That's the problem in proof of stake. But for example, if you are in proof of work, you try to find a system to actually, or even even if you are not in proof of work, you may say every node has a vote, for example. What's the problem? The problem in that case are economies of scale, in the sense that there will be an enormous push for the nodes to be run by those that have a technological advantage, that are those that concentrate more nodes. So you don't really know if you really, in the end, even in that way, you get distribution. One possibility is everything that goes around quadratic voting logic. So finding ways in which you actually really have a mechanic, which is again economic, to create an incentive to be smaller. But this can be gained as well. It can be gained with some losses, which is not so bad, from an economic point of view. Then otherwise, obviously, there is the detection of specific individuals, obviously, which raises a number of issues. Blockchains often don't like it. Then they can move to appreciate this, but that seems a little bit, to spoil some of the fundamental principles of blockchains. yes, there are solutions, no one looks perfect so far, you know, so in a sense, this link between power and skin in the game seems to be still the easiest or the most effective way to start it. Then obviously you need to introduce checks and balances.